Oxford from the inside. The good, the bad, but always the truth.
Hello and welcome back to Oxford from the Inside, the good, the bad, but always the truth. I am your host for today's episode, Junaid. I am a third year studying medicine at Trinity College. And if you are an avid listener or watcher of Oxford from the Inside, you'll know I haven't been on an episode in a while. So I'm back today. All my fans will, be really happy to see this. And I'm back with my good friends, Amy and George. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Amy. I'm a third year medic at Trinity.
And I'm George. I'm a third year medic at Magdalen College.
Lovely. So yes, we are all medics, which, as I've explained before, I think means we spend a lot of time together in lectures and labs and whatnot. And of course, Amy and I have had a lot of time together in the last 2 years being at the same college. But today we're not actually talking about medicine as a course, but we are talking about the interview process. So if I think back to when I was a prospective student, I remember thinking Oxford interviews are such a weird mystical concept. I think they have a sort of air of mystery about them. What sort of questions are asked, what sort of problems, what sort of tricky problems you have to solve. So, and is any of that true? So today, that's sort of the angle I'm taking with this episode. I want to give you guys some real information on what sort of things happen, sort of demystify the whole process for you. So with medicine is one of the few subjects in the UK where you will commonly interview at your university. But at Oxford, and there's so many different ways that universities will go about this in different formats. Oxford's format for medicine interviews is pretty much the same as their format for other interviews. It is essentially just an academic conversation with usually two people, with a third person maybe taking notes for about 20 minutes about the subject. That's pretty much it. But what questions are asked, what goes on, we will discuss all of that today. In today's episode, we'll be talking about generally what Amy and George's interviews were like, how they found them, what types of questions were asked, and of course, for any prospective students listening or watching, any top tips or advice we have for you as you prepare for your interview. So all that to come and more. I will just add before we get into the episode that if you're looking for official information on how the university plans to run all their interviews, this is not the place to get it. Oxford from the Inside is not an official source of university information. If you want that, you should go to the university websites, to college websites, or if you're not applying this year at the open days or virtual open days, you can try and talk to admissions tutors or medicine tutors themselves. They'll be able to give you that information. But what we are trying to do here is give you an inside view into the student experience, and specifically, what sort of advice and tips we would give to prospective students applying. So do keep that in mind as we get into the episode. But I'm very much looking forward to it. I hope you guys are too, Amy and George. Let's get started. So generally, what were your interviews like? If you can think back to way back when you were a fresh-faced prospective student, how did you find interviews?
Do you want to go, Amy?
Yeah, Amy, if you want to go first.
So I remember arriving for interviews and being obviously very nervous because it was an interview, but what was quite nice, but also like a bit nerve-wracking as well, was that you stay a night when you come for a medicine interview, and you do one college on one day. They interview you, and then you go to another college on the second day after you've slept over. So there's all sorts of like new things going on, like you get to go and eat in their hall, and like you meet new people and like you hang out with them and stuff. So it's not just the interview that's really like new to you, it's everything else that's going on. But actually it was quite nice because the students kind of took you to your place where the places you needed to be, and like to dinner, and they ran activities in the afternoons and stuff. So you did kind of feel like you'd come into some kind of a family before you'd even been truly like accepted. So I think it was quite a good taste of actually what Oxford is like when you get here eventually as well. And I definitely, when I went for my interview, that was the first time where I really, really wanted to come here. Before that, I was kind of like, oh, I'll just see what happens. And then at my interview, I was like, no, this is really nice. I don't know if you had a similar experience, George.
Yeah, my experience was really similar to yours. I remember on the way down being really stressed out of my mind. But when I arrived at Merton, which was where I was staying, like you said, the students who were already there that were helping manage the process was so lovely. All the other applicants as well, we got on really well. And there's this nice sort of sense of like camaraderie, which definitely like eased me in to my first interview. And then after the sort of first one, you do sort of get that little kick of adrenaline, and everything just sort of flows. It goes so quickly from there, or at least it did in my experience.
Yeah, definitely. I remember, like you're saying, really not realizing how much of a social experience it would actually be. Having said that, I don't know, and when I say that, I literally mean I do not know what it will be like this year in terms of how they're planning to interviews. That information, like I said, you'll have to get that from the university. But yeah, there's definitely a nice sense of sort of trying out what college life would be like when you're there. Definitely. And yes, it's worth mentioning, you will be interviewed at 2 colleges in medicine. It's a little bit different to the pooling systems that other subjects have. You will definitely be interviewed at 2 colleges, and usually it'll be 2 interviews at each college. So now going into those interviews specifically, did you feel as though they were sort of like split either way, like whether there was an interview that was specifically about sort of sciencey problems, as opposed to more like medicine as a career, or was it more mix and match? Amy, if you want to answer first.
Yeah, for me, so I interviewed at Wadham and Trinity, and the year I interviewed, they were very much split into a definite science one, and then one that was, in some cases, sort of more ethical and assessing your knowledge of medicine in kind of like a social and like economical kind of way. And then actually one of them was also quite like to do with my personal statement and to do with like who I am as a person and what I enjoy doing and stuff, and kind of assessing like me in that way as well. So I'd say the science ones are generally quite like standard. You obviously don't get the same questions, but the vibes in a science one are very like I'm sure we'll talk about the like what kind of questions come up, but that was the sort of constant. And then the other one can actually be quite varied, but in some ways is easier to answer because you just sort of speak from experience or like your common sense or just logic. So the 2 are very different. For me, that was the case, but I know for other people they can be quite mixed.
So when I was interviewed, because like I said, I went to Merton first and then I went on to Magdalen on the second day. And I experienced both ends of the spectrum. So at Merton, I actually had 3 interviews, and they were all just a complete mixed bag of everything. So they would ask you maybe something more sciencey 1 minute, and then something more ethical would be the next question. So that was a really interesting experience, actually. It definitely sort of kept me on my toes. There was no warning beforehand of what would be at the interview, which was unlike when I went to Magdalen on the second day, because when I arrived there, we were explicitly told you will have 1 interview which will be science focused, and you'll have 1 interview which will be ethics focused. Yeah, and like Amy was saying, in my experience, the ethics ones, I really enjoyed them a little bit more than the science ones, actually. You could get into it like with the people that you were interviewing, and you just speak from like the heart, and you speak from what your own like ideas are. I remember with my interview, it was very topical. So before the interview itself, we were taken to a room to read a report on the junior doctor strikes, which was very much in the news, part of like what was going on that year. And then we used that as a springboard for like the first 5 minutes of the interview to talk about what the concerns of the junior doctors were, and like how I, if I was in charge, how I'd go about solving them, which I thought was quite fun.
Yeah, definitely. We could actually, it seems like a good point to actually start going into talking about, as you start to mention, George, the types of questions that come up. So we could perhaps start with like sciencey sort of Well, I mean, we might find that they sort of overlap at some point, but if we start with the sort of sciencey problem-solving questions, um, uh, how did you find them? What did you think of them when you were going through them? And did you prepare in any way for them? And what sort of tips would you give students in terms of tackling those questions?
Yeah, so I remember being quite worried about the science interviews, mainly because of the ethical and sort of like who the person you are, kind of with your personal statement and stuff, you can pretty much like make up on the spot if you have knowledge of those things just from like common sense and stuff. So I was really worried about the science because I did feel like, I guess, sort of an imposter trying to make out that I understood more than I did. But actually I'd been given this tip before I went to my Oxford interview, which was basically like, no matter what you get given, whether like you have no clue or like you know the answer 100%, say everything you're thinking. And I still like attribute getting into Oxford on the basis of this like one thing. And it works for the ethics interview as well. It's not just a science one, but especially the science one. You get given a graph, and you like, a lot of them are, I don't know if you guys found the same, but a lot of it was like, you're given a graph and you're asked questions maybe on this graph. And even if you have no idea what it's showing, if you can be like, oh, this is what's on the x-axis, this is what's on the y-axis, this is what it could be showing, then they're looking for somebody who, even if they don't know the answers to the questions, can like reason with the information they're given. And what I would say is that if you're not sure you've been given enough information to answer the question, or you need clarification on something in one of those sciencey questions, don't be afraid to ask for it, or ask them to sort of, what did you say about this part of it again? Because actually that's showing that you're using the information you're being given to come up with some kind of a hypothesis around what like that answer should be. And it's a lot less about knowing the answer and a much more about whether you how and why you get to that answer that you're given, even if you get the answer completely wrong. So like, don't come out of the interview and discuss with one of the other people going in for the interview what they got and what you got if they've asked you the same question, because it will be pointless. Because ultimately, if they've just given the answer like that and that's the right answer, they probably won't get as much kudos if you've gone through like your stage of thinking and stuff. So I guess that would be my main tip, would be verbalize everything.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point, actually. Like, it's not about it. Well, the idea of that you were saying, that it's not about, you know, getting the answers right. It's more they want to see how you think, and a lot of the time, you know, you're having this interview with usually a tutor at that college who will, if you get into that college, be teaching you. Usually even in rooms where you will be having tutorials. So it very much is kind of like a mock tutorial, in the sense that they're trying to see, okay, could I teach this person? Would they pick up what I'm trying to tell them? So yeah, I think that is a very valuable piece of advice. You want to show them, you know, how you think, for sure. George, your comments on sciencey questions and your experience?
Yeah, I mean, Junaid, you've kind of taken the words out of my mouth, because in a lot of ways, it does really mirror an Oxford tutorial. Obviously, it's not quite the same, but like has been said, it's definitely about getting there and about your reasoning that you use to get there, over just sort of knowing something offhand. And I remember I was quite intimidated by the science questions and, you know, just by the concept of a science interview itself, because there's very little wiggle room. You have to sort of be, you know, like, you have to know your stuff. And also you're being interviewed by people who are scientists themselves, researchers themselves. So there's not, there's not a lot of room to sort of hide. You're in the spotlight. But yeah, I think Amy's tip was a really good one, because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for someone who will respond well to the sort of Oxford tutorial style of teaching, which is definitely about getting you to think and like sort of stretching you and making you arrive at the answer. I think if we're sharing tips, another one that I found that helped me was actually take a moment after you're asked a question, just to sort of think, you know, and let it sort of like go around in your head. It's because often, at least I found that if I was going to sort of jump in and answer something straight away, I definitely jump the gun. And there would be things that I had failed to consider, and, you know, all that sort of stuff. So just taking a couple of seconds, just to think about things and just make sure you're looking at it from all angles, I think really helped me. It helped me come across more articulate as well, and more ordered in the way that I was thinking, rather than just sort of like rambling an answer back for like 5 minutes. And it's definitely not awkward, because I know one of the things I was worried about was sort of awkward silences. But I mean, like when you get, I mean, at least for me, when I got there, like I was so intense and in the moment that like I just didn't care about awkward silences. I was trying to think, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, Amy, when you just mentioned about being given a graph that like unlocked a memory, I remember being given a graph that I honestly had no clue what was going on. It wasn't the normal sort of x-axis, y-axis graph. And yeah, I definitely did have to take a moment, like you were saying, George, just to like sit there and look at it. And I remember actually like completely going down the wrong path in terms of what was going on. But I think an important thing that I did was say, once I realized, this was also like a good few minutes into the question, but to say that I realized like, you know, what was going wrong and what I previously thought and why now I know that that's wrong. At that time, I wasn't super confident with what I was saying. Obviously it went okay. So that's good to know that, you know, you can be wrong. And yeah, like kind of combination of what both of you guys saying, take some time, think about it and verbalize everything for sure. Did either of you have any more comments? Yeah, no, go for it, George. Yeah.
I was going to say, if we're sharing graph stories, I would
yeah, that's what this is now.
So many graphs. They just love a graph.
Yeah.
And I remember when one of them, I was super stumped because, like, I think one of the axes was like on a log scale, and it was actually the first time I'd seen like axes represented on a log scale, and so the shape wasn't as you'd expect if both the axes were linear. And I just remember, I remember feeling like so on top of the world when I worked that out. And, well, yeah. Hopefully they're impressed.
Yeah, we can hope. Yeah. Any more comments on sciencey questions before we move on to the other side? No? Well, in that case, moving on to, yeah, I mean, this is kind of a broad category, but the other side of medicine, of course, being, you know, talking about ethics, talking about your personal sort of attributes, like what makes you a doctor? Why do you want to be a doctor? Do you understand what it means to be a doctor? Questions about medicine as a career. Amy, if you'd like to go first, discussing about your experiences.
Yeah, so as I've already said, my everything else interviews were quite varied. And so I think the first thing I'd say, and it's probably common to like all medicine interviews, wherever you interview at, is know your personal statement really well. And that might be like what books you've said you've read, make sure you've read them. And so you can answer questions, because in one of my interviews, they did ask like specifically about things on my personal statement, some of the things I've said I've done, my work experience and what I'd learned from it. Like my hobbies and stuff and what I did to like chill out. They did ask some of that stuff. So that would be my first tip. Really know like your personal statement off by heart, as you should do anyway, because you wrote it. And then I guess like another sort of subcategory of interview questions is sort of the current affairs questions, which like can be really different depending on the year you interviewed, but mine was about a particular drug and like whether we should provide this drug on the NHS. And that I also had questions about sort of allocation of services, so which services would you provide the most money for if you were making the financial decisions. And that actually like that's quite like a broad like topic, and as a prospective medical student, you're not necessarily going to be like really on top of like political decisions on like where money goes and stuff. But the key, as I say before, is to verbalize why you would make those decisions, because you're capable of like coming to your own conclusions about the question, whether that's what the government would do in real life or not. Like that's irrelevant. It's actually about like your logic behind it, and can you explain why you would do these things. And then I guess like the other side of things were like the ethics questions, which are like your true ethics questions. And I can't really remember any specific ones, but it is generally, they are trying to get the idea that you are like a moral person who could be trusted within the medical profession, and who also has kind of like a good understanding of like how that side of things works in medical practice, and sort of the difficulties that you might come across in medical practice, even though like we like ideally like to be 100% ethical all the time. So yeah, like that's something to have a good think about. I don't know if anyone's like, George, have you got any other questions that they asked you specifically?
I was asked such like a range of questions. Honestly, I feel like some of them were made up on the spot, from stuff like history and philosophy of science. So yeah, like you mentioned, sort of like where should we allocate funding, kind of like a triage thing, and then sort of like fairly sort of, what's the word? Fairly sort of well-known like ethical concepts. I remember, as you were saying about personal statement, I remember at Merton, someone, I can't remember who it was, they read my personal statement and they said, okay, so, you know, you've mentioned here that you like music, you're in an orchestra. So why is it you think that some people don't like classical music and some people do? And I was like, yeah, but really it was, yeah, so I guess I'm just trying to emphasize like how broad they will like ask you stuff on. And like in the science questions, it's about reasoning, and it's about trying to work your way to an answer. So my piece of advice would be definitely give yourself a grounding in medical ethics and an understanding of the medical profession. If you can sort of be familiar with like key concepts that are sort of coming up time and time again within medical questions, like sort of like cost effectiveness, sort of qualities, all of that stuff. If you are familiar with concepts like, you know, sharing of medical information, when you can and can't do that, or when you should and shouldn't do that, that will provide you with like a sort of framework in which you can reason from to come to your answers. And it's exactly the same with current affairs and stuff. Make sure that you're up to date, make sure that you know what's going on. And so again, so you can make a decent reasoned argument, because that is, at the end of the day, at least in my experience, that's what they're looking for. Yeah.
Yeah. Do either of you have any like advice on where or like how you can sort of get a good grounding in medical ethics and well, those sort of like medical general knowledge sort of issues? Anything you particularly used?
I used, I think the first book I used was literally Medical Ethics, a very short introduction. The series is great, like you've probably heard it a million times, but
I will link it in the bio on YouTube if you're watching. So, yeah.
That's cool, thanks. But yeah, that does like a very sort of like brief but concise look at lots of different areas. And, you know, if there's one that you're particularly sort of like interested in, or one that sort of like piques your curiosity, you can go and investigate that for yourself. But that's definitely something I recommend reading, just in general, really.
Yeah, I used that one, but I also had another one, which I can also look up so that Junaid can put in the bio. But it was more of a textbook on medical ethics. It was very easy to understand, and it was just something that my school library had. But I can look up what it was so that you can link that as well.
Yes, I will indeed. I also had something to add. This isn't as like established as a book as the other two, but the classic like medicine, like get into medical school interview book with a lot of questions is actually quite good on. I mean, it has a lot of stuff which is useful, but it also does have quite a nice like comprehensive section, just getting you up to speed on like the basic concepts. I wouldn't say just to use that, but it's a really good like starting point, because it just tells you the basic level of what you need to know. I also quite liked, if you have access to BBC iPlayer, Radio 4's show Inside the Ethics Committee is just quite an interesting one. They discuss like tricky ethics cases, which is nothing like the stuff you, well, it might be the stuff you're asked on, but it's just nice to get your teeth into some really complicated stuff, and can, I suppose, make you sound impressive also. So yeah, I will link that. I will link all of this in the description. Yeah, that's great. And yeah, no, I agree. Both of you have raised super valuable points. Especially important to know your personal statement inside and out. I remember being asked about, you write things in your personal statement and you expect to be asked about certain things, and then you're called up on something completely like that you weren't expecting at all. So I definitely recommend, my piece of advice for this bit would be to, I'd say take every line of your personal statement and think like, okay, if they pulled this up and they said, what about this? That you'd have something else to say. So you're prepared in that sense. But yeah, like Amy was saying, if you've written your personal statement and it's honest to yourself, then that you should find that really easy. Anyway, yeah. Anything else to add on this section?
I just wanted to chime in again because I kind of forgot, but current affairs.
Yes.
I know we sort of touched on it already, but they love their current affairs because it shows that you're interested, it shows that you care, it shows that you're interested in the science, you want to be a doctor, like you're ticking so many boxes. So do keep an eye on current affairs, like healthcare current affairs. And it's a little bit harder to do that, I suppose, like beyond just sort of following the news and stuff. I know that I looked at like a lot of sort of like letters and like kind of like opinion pieces written in the BMJ by doctors on current affairs. And that was really good because that's someone's opinion, right? And you can use the information, their opinion, to sort of think, well, what do I think of this bit? What do I think of this bit? And then formulate your own opinion. And it can bring up stuff that you didn't consider. I can't remember how I accessed that. I'm not sure if it's available just like open access or if I was friends with someone who had like institutional access. But
you normally have to have a subscription to it, but often like your school library will be happy to get that kind of thing in. Yeah. And that's definitely where I read it. Yeah.
I think it's the same for me actually. Yeah.
Yes, getting in touch with your school about that is good advice.
Yeah,
hopefully
definitely.
They'll be able to help. Yes. Anything else on that?
Or a local library, actually. Could be.
Yeah. So I think we'll move on to the next question. Did either of you get any sort of, going back to the idea of an Oxford interview, did you get any weird sort of outside the box Oxford-y questions at all, or is that more of a myth that people tell about Oxford interviews?
I definitely got one question which I wasn't expecting, which was if you could take anybody to dinner, dead, alive, or imaginary, who would it be? And we'd just gone through all the like ethical and current affairs questions, so I was a little like, okay, this is different. It was like a different mood to the interview. And I am still not clear to this day whether this answer has to be clever or not, because it was quite a personal question actually. And I sort of just answered from the heart and said who I thought it would be, and also took a bit of time to think, because I don't think they actually mind that, because obviously that's quite a question to have an immediate answer to. So yeah, I think any of those really weird questions, if they are sort of like personal questions like that, or like what's your favorite book and why, or film and why, or something, don't be afraid to be like, okay, let me just think a second. Oh, okay. Because like ultimately no one just stores that information in like the front of their brain. Yeah, I don't know if anyone had any, like, sometimes I've heard that people get like really weird sciencey ones, like how much air is there and stuff. Like, did anyone get anything like that?
I didn't get any proper like corkers. I mean, I have a couple of stories about. In one of the questions, I calculated the volume of blood in the body to be like 18 million liters. Yeah, something went a little bit wrong there, and that was really awkward. But I remember I was asked a question which I thought was almost cutting, actually, my ethics interviews, and they basically just asked me, we've got so many candidates and they're all amazing, they can all do this, this, and this, why would we pick you? And I was like, yeah, and that definitely sort of twisted it on me, and it was like it was an opportunity for me to sort of like show my mettle a little bit. But as far as like, you know, like the real sort of like stereotypical like head scratchers, I was unlucky, or maybe lucky, to not get any, thankfully.
Yeah, I think it really does vary. Like I've heard, I personally didn't get any. So, you know, there's whether how that contributes to imposter syndrome, I don't know, but we'll put that aside. But I did hear from other candidates when I was interviewing, being asked things like, tell me something you find funny. And I remember at the time thinking like, wow, if I got asked that, I would have no clue what to do. But I think it's a valid point to make, that they you know, they want to see that you're a normal person who, you know, has, you know, they're not going to expect you to be like, oh, well, here's a perfect like scientific a thing that relates to medicine, but also perfectly answers this normal question that you're giving me. They're not going to really look for something like that. Yeah, just being yourself and relaxing. I mean, sometimes even interviewers will ask this just to get you to relax a little bit by you know, causing you to just sit back a bit. So yeah, I think probably the best advice for these sort of things, though I wasn't in this situation, would be just to be honest and just be yourself. Yeah, and also appreciate that it is really varied in terms of like, just listening to us three now, you can appreciate anything can happen really with Oxford tutors being allowed to interview. Yeah. So just to finish off now, what final top tips or advice would you give to any interview candidates listening to today's episode? We've obviously mentioned quite a few, but yeah, is there anything else you want to add to finish? Amy, to go first.
Yeah, just sort of echoing what I've already said, really. Just verbalize everything, think about things broadly, consider everything like as sort of this, consider it as an open question rather than just it having one answer, and just accept that like every Oxford interview is really different. So you're not going to ever be able to revise a set number of questions and then them come up in an interview. And therefore it's much more about practicing the techniques involved in answering questions. And yeah, that would be my advice. Sort of practice techniques and don't worry so much about the answers.
Yeah, definitely super valuable advice. I second all of that. George?
I've actually got 2 tips. So you're getting 2 for the price.
Oh, here we go.
My first one would be read as much as you can. Like as much as you can, sort of given time constraints of all stuff you have going on in your life and school and everything. And as much as you're interested in as well, because it will come through at the interview, and like it gives you that sort of like pool of knowledge in that you can access. And like, you know, even if it's not something that's, you know, the answer to the question or whatever, like as we've said, that's not always the most important bit. And they want someone who's interested. And if you can show that you're interested by, you know, doing lots of reading around the subject, whether it's science or like ethics, current affairs, I think that was what basically like cinched it for me, I think, at least in my opinion. And my other one would be, don't let other people psych you out, whether they might be doing it or unintentionally. It doesn't matter, because, you know, it's a very sort of like competitive couple of days, a very competitive environment. You know, people might just, you know, want to discuss their interviews, and, you know, they might unintentionally psych you out. I would just try and say, like, don't let it affect you. If you know that you're going to be like the kind of person who might be more susceptible to that stuff, just don't really engage. Just say like, you know, my interview went how it went, and like, I don't see any reason in doing a post-mortem, because that's the attitude I took. Because like I said, I just don't see any point in doing it. And you may come across people who seem like they have everything on lock, and, you know, they were just, you know, rattling off answers like it was nothing. You know, that certainly wasn't me, and I made it. So just don't let anyone psych you out, because it's about you and it's about your performance. That's really important, I feel.
Yeah, I fully agree with everything you've said, for sure. And yeah, definitely with like just having allowing yourself to have a genuine interest in your subject, because that, like, by reading, or even if you're not a fan of reading, listening to podcasts or you know, watching stuff on YouTube or radio, or like anything you can do to increase your knowledge, like George said, it will come through to you in some way. You'll have something to talk about, something to relate to, for sure. With a huge range of questions that you're asked. I would probably add, it's quite a wholesome point, but I would add, enjoy it. Like, you're going to be really nervous, of course, that's normal. But the concept of, like, this is a subject that I assume you're super passionate about. You really enjoy reading about. You'd really be excited with the concept of studying it. So, like, the opportunity to have like a 20-minute conversation with like academics who are like in the lead of their field is quite a cool opportunity. So, to enjoy that, enjoy being able to sit there and essentially just chat about the subject is quite a cool feeling. So if you can sort of hold on to, like, that's what I try to tell myself, to hold on to that idea. And that helped me not be too nervous about the whole thing. So that was my sort of way of looking at it. Having fun is a good thing, is what I'd say. Cool. So I think that does take us to the end of the episode. Thank you very much for listening and watching. And thank you very much, Amy and George, for being on the show and sharing your experiences with us and joining us at Oxford from the Inside. Thank you to our followers for engaging with our content. Remember to follow us at Oxford from the Inside on Instagram, on Twitter at Ofty Podcast, and check out our Facebook page for regular updates on our content. I hope you stay safe and well. And from myself and from Amy and George, bye. Should we have a wave, everyone?
Bye.
Yeah.